Now there's all kinds of different people in this world. There's only one pie.
Welcome to the Team Made Apart podcast, the podcast designed to teach freelancers, contractors, and remote workers, really anyone working apart, how to build better relationships with those they work with and those they work for. I'm your host, Ryan Rogar. Before we get started, financial support for the Team Made Apart podcast is provided by R2, a fully distributed brand relationship consultancy. R2 has specific expertise and experience in helping service companies grow, develop, and maintain impactful relationships through world-class brand strategy and design. R2 supports the world's best distributed companies by providing valuable insights, strategy, empathy, and tactical expertise to help them foster truly meaningful relationships from top management to top consumer. If the success of your business depends on the relationships you make, then you need R2. To learn more or to request a call, simply visit r2mg.com/podcast. That's r2mg.com/podcast. R2, relationships squared. Also, financial support comes from teammadeapart.com. Leveraging 20 plus years of global agency and creative hiring expertise, Team Made Apart provides distributed organizations with access to the best and brightest creative talent from around the world. Through deep understanding of client needs and meaningful relationships with talent, Team Made Apart facilitates a sort of virtual handshake between prospective employer and prospective employee to reduce risk and eliminate doubt from creative hiring decisions. Take a step towards filling that creative-shaped void in your distributed team by visiting teammadeapart.com/talent. That's teammadeapart.com/talent to learn more. Finally, financial support comes from supporters like you. Members of our Happy Little Podcast community can make contributions directly to the show by visiting teammadeapart.com/podcast and clicking on the donation link. Donations can be made in any amount and would go a long way towards keeping this show on the air. If you appreciate the work we're doing and would like to get involved, just visit teammadeapart.com/podcast, click the donate button, and you're on your way. Thanks in advance for your continued support. And now, on to the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Team Made Apart podcast. Today's special guest is author, speaker, and CEO at People G2, Chris Dyer. People G2 is a fully distributed company of more than 30 people and 3,000 independent contractors focused on pre-employment screening, helping clients find better employees. On the heels of his book, The Power of Company Culture and How Any Business Can Build a Culture That Improves Productivity, Performance, and Profits, Chris established his authority in the remote workspace and became a sought-after public speaker and keynote, coaching top companies on how to develop culture on remote teams. His new book, Remote Work, Redesign Processes, Practices, and Strategies to Engage a Remote Workforce, arrives in the summer of 2021 and will continue to serve Chris's mission to teach others how to build great remote company cultures. Here for an insightful conversation about the different types of remote work, including the latest on work from home and hybrid teams, the keys to building an amazing company culture, and to discuss the so-called rush back to the office post-COVID, please join me in welcoming to the show the incredible Chris Dyer. Hey there, Chris. How are you?
Doing great. How are you?
I am so good. Where are you calling from this morning?
I am in Orange County, California.
Oh, that's amazing. I am super jealous of sunny California right now. I shouldn't say totally jealous, given all the COVID restrictions and all that stuff. Not super jealous, but I am weather jealous.
If you have to be stuck inside, it's a pretty beautiful view.
Yeah, it's maybe the best place to be, I think. So I'd take that anytime. Well, hey, Chris, so as we get started here, let's talk a little bit about just sort of who you are, where you come from, and what your position here in the remote workspace is.
Yeah, so I am a accidental, remote CEO and advocate. And what I mean by that is I've had a company since 2001, but in 2009, I decided to take the company fully remote. And we did that only to save money. And we thought it might be temporary. The recession was happening pretty bad. And we thought, well, we can save money by cutting all our expenses, and our rent, or sort of our landlord, our release just happened to be coming up, and sent everybody home. And 2 weeks in, we said, holy crap, this is amazing. This is like the best thing ever. And we just decided we were going to stay remote forever. And we've done that ever since. And I have several other startups and all that. So I love remote. I love being able to have my own coffee right here anytime I need it. Peace and quiet, deep time to think. And, my people love it too.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, and I love to hear your story in that sense because, I mean, so many of the people that I talk to, oh, I've always been remote. We started remote first, all this stuff, and I think it's important, this transition, right? I mean, obviously you did it in a time that wasn't necessarily forced by pandemic, but, that experience, I think, of making that sort of intentional shift, I think probably sets you up pretty well to talk to people who are experiencing problems now.
Right. And I think it's exactly why I believe remote is going to stay, right? There may be a certain percentage of people that go back to the office or go back in hybrid, but we did it for a reason, right? And that was the recession. People are doing it for a reason today because of COVID. We saw the benefits. We saw that it could work. We pushed through all of the bull crap that people thought, how do you know if they're working? And will you be as productive? And can you still collaborate? And all that crap that people thought was real turned out not to be real. We found solutions for everything and we're the better for it. And I think many companies will have that same experience. And even if they don't, even if they're not motivated, their best employees are going to be motivated to keep working remotely. And they're going to push the envelope a bit on this.
It's true. I think it's sort of the corporate equivalent of the trust fall, right? Like, I mean, basically you've got to almost take that leap of faith. I mean, obviously with a business, you have to be somewhat calculated, but I think it is important that we listen to our teammates and understand what it is they're actually wanting, and this experiment, this grand experiment. I like the parallel that you just drew with the sort of the economic recession too, from before, because you're right. I mean, basically that was a catalyst that drove many people remote. This too is a catalyst driving people remote. And I think even though the circumstance is different, I guess the net effect is the same. So I think that's an interesting parallel to bring up. Maybe before we get too much deeper, do you mind breaking down sort of the different types of remote worker? So I think, and maybe this will help frame our discussion. Just as we're talking about people who've been forced to remote work and other things like this, there's obviously a gradation of different types of remote workers.
Sure.
And so I think it might help to just sort of set some definitions before we go too much deeper.
Yeah, so it is really important because there are different types of remote and what they need and how they operate and what's going to happen in their world is completely different. So the first one is the digital nomad. Now, the digital nomads have been a little stuck here the last year. They haven't really been able to live the life that they wanted to live, but they're doing it. But these are the people that you see in, sexy stock photos sitting by the pool in their bathing suit on their laptop doing 1 hour of work a day and they can make all the money they need to make, right? This is that dream, whatever. And there are people that do that. I know some of them, they do great work, but that's not what I'm talking about. Those are solo entrepreneurs. They have a small freelance team or something. And that's not what we're talking about. Those people never know whether for as sexy as those pictures look, those people never know where their next internet's coming from. They literally spend half of their energy figuring out where the next Wi-Fi hotspot's going to be so they can get on and do their work. And that is a real struggle for them, especially as you're traveling around in places that don't have the infrastructure. The next one is what I have, which is the work from home. So dedicated workspace, dedicated internet. I'm going to the same desk every day. I have the same equipment. I have my computer here. Yes, I can get on a plane. Yes, I can be somewhere else. But for the most part, I have a designated place, just like I would in a traditional office. So I have the consistency, the repetition that's really, really important. And hopefully I have a dedicated space in my home, right? Anyone who's working from home should not be sharing a space, should not be at a table, a kitchen table, or in your bedroom if you can help it. I mean, there are situations where you can't, but if you can create a designated space, even if you have to put up one of those, changing curtain things or something just to create that sense of space, that's work from home. Now, there's also in the field. So we don't often think about these people, but if you are a HVAC repair person, a plumber, an electrician, you're the pool guy or pool woman, you're the, all these different jobs are remote jobs. You do not go into an office. You spend your day out in the world, going to different locations. And so how do you communicate? How do you work? How are you seen? How do you communicate with headquarters and all of that, right? Those are remote workers as well. And then you have your freelancers, your part-time side hustle gig workers, your Uber drivers, your Postmates, your, all these types of people that are doing this. Again, they're a little kind of close to that, HVAC repair person or something, right? There's a similarity there where they're out, their environment changes constantly. So you really need to know what kind of person you're talking about, who you're hiring, and who you're bringing on. Is this a freelancer in nine time zones away from you that's doing work, right? And so now asynchronous work is really important. Or is this someone that's worked from home 1 or 2 time zones away from you? The relationship's different, their needs are different, and how you're going to collaborate with them is much different.
Yeah, no, I think there's some great distinctions there. And I actually like the thought of sort of including these people who are going out and, like the HVAC guy, for example. A lot of the discussion you hear stays very elevated, right? It's the top level office worker who, with his white collar is able to sit home and do his work. But, I think immediately people, sort of discount. I mean, obviously there are a lot of jobs that you can't do remotely, but I think it is interesting to at least point out the remote aspects of what would otherwise be sort of not traditional remote work. So like in the sense of the HVAC guy. So I think that's interesting. So as we're evolving, and I mean, these types of teams have always existed, but another type that you sometimes include in this, array of remote workers is the hybrid worker, this hybrid situation that we're now coming into. It's gaining popularity now as people are, talking about work for returning back to the office and things like that. But this type of team has been around for some time. Do you mind sort of just talking a little bit about a hybrid team?
Yeah. So hybrid, is really this idea that you have some people in the office and some people who are not. Now, this has been going on for a very long time. Anyone who has salespeople on their team, anyone who has an executive who was on a plane more than they were in the office. I mean, we know a lot of these people, right? Every day they're hopping on a plane to somewhere, some location, some satellite office, going to visit a client. And they were constantly calling into conference calls, right? Whether it was on the phone or on video. And back, pre-COVID, I would say they were pretty ineffective. It was pretty disengaged meetings. They would often not be paying attention, and they would be, the background noise from them being in the airport lounge or wherever they were, right, was pretty ineffective. But now that we've had COVID and everyone has been forced to do this, I think we're going to see much better hybrid work. And what I mean by that is that we can now treat hybrid work the same way we treat remote work, meaning it doesn't matter if you have 3 people in the office, 3 on the road, and 3 at their homes. You're all going to be on Zoom or Teams or however you meet anyways. It doesn't really matter. Those 3 people who are in the office, they can go to lunch today together. I mean, that's nice, right? They can have that social interaction if that's important to them. But as far as their meetings and their collaborations go, they're still going to do it the same way as if everyone was at home.
Yeah, somebody made the point to me once that even for employees working on multiple floors, right, to your point, I mean, if you're working on floor 5 and everybody else is up on floor 13, the reality is you're a remote worker in some sense. You're using tools like Slack or video communication tools or whatever to talk back and forth to your team because it's not practical to get up every moment. And
Right.
and so, it's funny. It's really just kind of a mindset more than anything. And I think when people start to realize that, then maybe remote becomes a little less scary to your average manager.
Right. And I think, to be fair to managers, they don't know what they don't know. And so if we don't teach them and show them what they can do and how to manage, people remotely in a really effective way, then they're left to the sort of their own, concerns and fears. I mean, if you don't know something, this is a sort of a cognitive bias that our brains have. If I know 5 facts, right, and you present me something new I've never seen, I can only take the facts in my brain to somehow explain what I'm seeing. Our brains do not magically come up with new information and new things, right? I mean, let's just say that there's a giant fireball in the sky somewhere that's controlling our universe. If no one's seen the fireball, we have no evidence of the fireball, no one's ever going to say, well, there's probably a fireball somewhere controlling the universe. This does not happen in our brains. So if we don't tell managers, if we don't help them and explain to them how to do this and how to be effective, then they're going to be scared, they're going to be fearful, and they're not going to know how to do it. Now, that's to be fair to managers. To be really really honest to managers, if they think they have to manage people by seeing them, if they have to manage them by having them close to them, near them, around them, that is about fear and power and manipulation and command and control. And if you are that kind of person, you need to quickly go read some books and get some inspiration somewhere, because your life is going to get real tough real soon here. And if you are a worker who has a manager like that, you need to get a new job now and get away from that, because that will never be able to be the kind of person you need them to be and to help you succeed and elevate inside of an organization or just become better for your next job outside the organization. If they have to be able to touch you to be able to manage you, right? If they assume that the amount of meetings you're in, the amount of papers that are rustling on your desk is productivity, they are the worst manager for you. You need to get out.
Yeah, there's two things there that you said that I'd like to kind of unpack a little bit, or at least comment on. The first is this idea that, we obviously, especially for us who have been around remote work for some time, we can look at these management techniques, this command and control style of management, and look at it and recognize it's out of date and it's not in touch with what's reality these days. And I think you're right that, obviously people need to grow and evolve. And this is one of the problems I'm having so much with this concept of the new normal that you're hearing everyone throw around, right? This new normal, or this, idea of let's get back to how it was, that kind of thing. And I think it actually does kind of a disservice to, everybody who's been sick or lost work or all this other stuff, to try and pretend that we should just kind of gloss over these last couple of years and just start clean, just we're going to go back to the way it was, all the suffering, everything else you've done for the last years for nothing. We're just going to go back to the way it was. And I think that, really what we ought to be doing, and I think this is true of anybody in management or even for the employees themselves, like we all need to evolve, right? We all need to be better. And we should be using this period of, I would call it rapid growth, to really be educating ourselves and becoming better managers. And the other thing that you mentioned there was that idea of, if you've got this bad manager, go get yourself a new job. And I love this idea because I think that, I guess, sort of being empowered with the freedom to understand that you can go find a new job is a big deal. Now, granted, it's kind of a funky time, and maybe, there aren't people, or maybe in some positions, maybe it's more difficult to find work right now. I don't know. But I suspect that if you're dedicated and hardworking and you want to find a position, you can probably find a position somewhere. And so, but I like that idea of sort of taking the control back, rather than trying to make an old manager bend to you, rather just do the thing that's right for you. And so I think that both of those are really good points.
And this is the time to do it. And this is the time to put pressure on organizations to continue to support remote. If you're out there looking for a new job and you're saying, can I work remotely, or can I work remotely part of the time, or what does that look like? And they're continually hearing that, right? They're going to know they've got to continue to offer that and make that a part of the world. And what I'm waiting for is still the big epiphany that most people are going to have. And it's hard because I am sort of using a California filter here, but most schools are not open in California. Most schools are still doing, from a total percentage of kids percentage. There are a lot of schools that are back, or that are hybrid, or doing some combination. Like LA Unified is still 100% virtual. They make up the largest school, union district in our state. And so people still don't have the experience of working at home without kids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's true.
I mean,
it's totally different thing. Yeah,
totally different. I mean, like, you're not getting interrupted 50 times a day with, can I have a snack? Can I have help with my homework? Do you know what I mean? Like I said this in the beginning of the show, the time to deeply focus and do my work without interruption is one of the most fundamentally awesome things about remote work. And I can't imagine having a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old running around interrupting me all the time. And I'm trying to help them with their tech needs and getting on and making sure they're helping their teacher, or doing, are they showing up into their classroom? Like, that just totally fries your brain.
Yeah, no, it's true. It really does. And I also think of, like, our friends in some other countries where maybe they're not blessed to have the kind of real estate or spreads that we can get here in the States. And, you've got a little 1-bedroom flat or something like that where, you're trying to work around kids. You're trying to find a spot on the porch where you can set up a table. Like, things get pretty tricky. So, here in the US, for many of us, you can have a home and you can have a little bit of space and you can spread out a little bit. And, it's, I think more doable in some places than others. But I think that, it's really important, that idea of trying to find your space where you can find it. But as far as a real remote work experience, you're right. It's not normal to have, little kids running around and everything. And not to mention, it's full-time work to do that stuff. My wife is a teacher. She teaches in the junior high here, 8th and 9th grade. And here in Utah, we've been back. Well, the junior high kids have been back in school since November. But up till that time, when we were fully remote, we had to spend a lot of time on schedule and routine and making sure that we had our kids, basically our poor kids were on the same bell schedule as they would normally have. So they were getting up at 8 and they were doing their, getting ready for school, and they'd get dressed and then they'd come downstairs and work. And, as a lifelong freelancer and remote worker myself, that's how I've always done it, right? For me, it made sense to get up and get dressed and even if it's not physical separation, put some emotional or mental separation between rest and work, and so I felt like it was really important to do that for our kids too. And it's a crazy time, and I could go on a whole diatribe about, how hard it's been on the teachers to try and become remote workers all of a sudden and all this stuff. So that's a huge topic, but I think it's a good one worth talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. My wife's a teacher too. So we have that.
Oh, good. So you've been through all this with me.
I've been through it all. And what's been, really interesting is this is the hardest year she's ever had. I mean, her and I have been together, either as a boyfriend, girlfriend, or as spouses her entire teaching career. And this is the hardest year. She'll tell you that. And I will tell you that just in watching her. Of what she's had to do, because she's teaching basically 3 different ways all at the same time. Yeah.
Well, and I have to imagine if your wife's anything like mine, she got into it for the kids. Doing all this stuff on there's a million tools, but she works on Canvas, and so doing all this work on Canvas and having limited touch with kids and stuff. Like, I mean, when you become an IT person, not a teacher, it sort of shifts the passion, I guess. And so it's been a kind of an unfortunate year. And luckily like I say, we're back in school here. So, I mean, luckily, she's getting back into sort of, I'm a teacher mode, but even at that, I mean, she still has to keep the online stuff going full speed for everybody who's working from home. And then she's teaching in the classroom also. And so, I mean, it's still, doing a couple modalities at once. So they are being asked to do a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. It's an interesting year. I think there's going to be, we'll see. We'll see if teachers burn out. We may have a huge teacher shortage in the next couple of years.
It'll be interesting to see for sure.
Yeah.
Well, hey, so to take this back to our conversation a few minutes ago, I wanted one of the things you mentioned in hybrid teams is that obviously people are evolving and hopefully will get better. But the example you used of the CEO who was kind of crappy at his job because he was always on the road or always calling in from, a flight or whatever. And, but you mentioned that, you had hope that maybe we'd be improving. And one of the things I think we could do to improve is, obviously improve our communication. But I wonder if you would go into sort of meetings a little bit and how we might make our meetings better. I think that, obviously there's been a lot of technological advancement in terms of being able to make our meetings, I guess, physically better. But I wonder if you talk a little bit about different meeting types and the way that, your hybrid teams can work better together.
So here's the good news. Anybody in a leadership position can radically change their meetings right now and have a huge impact on their team. So if you only lead a team of people and you can only impact them, that you can still do this stuff. If you're the CEO, you can do this stuff, right? It doesn't really, whatever your level of influence is, you can put this in. And the first thing is that all of your meetings should be highly curated. If you're not curating your meetings and you're not being, and sorry for using this word, but if you're not being a Nazi about it, right? If you're not being a total dictator about, that might be the better word, total dictator about how your meetings are curated, then you are doing your entire team a disservice. People want to know what is expected and how to be in whatever situation they're in. They're constantly looking for you to give them cues on what to do and when. So I'll give you a quick example before I dive into what the meetings I suggest you do. I'll used to have parties in my house all the time. And I would have like a pool party in the summer. And I would say, we would try to like get everybody to come over, like that, our friends and people that we don't get to see all the time. And it would be like, hey, we're going to have this giant open house pool party in the summer, right? might get 30 or 40 people that would come by all day, open house. It was like, come by and say hi, our kids might swim, they would leave, right? And then we decided to change it to a beer garden party because I had gone to Germany and we spent 3 weeks going to every beer garden we could find. It was the most amazing experience of the entire beer garden culture. So I came back and said, we're going to have a beer garden party this year and it's going to be German and you need to dress up. And if you don't want to dress up, you better wear German colors or Bavarian colors. We're only having German food. You can only bring German beer if anyone we said Bavarian. So that includes sort of Austrian, Bavarian, a little bit of Czech. We said those are the only beers that are allowed or wines from those regions. If you show up with Coors Light, I will throw it on the street. I mean, I was a freaking dictator. I was like, gave them all these rules. And I thought, oh, my friends are going to hate me. Like I'm being such a jerk. We have 150 people show up to that party every year.
Oh, wow.
Why? I had beer at both of them. I had hot dogs at both of them, right? We swam in the pool. We hung out with our families. Why did 3 times as many people show up to that one? Because they knew what the rules were. They knew what was expected. I created an entire environment for them. So there was no guesswork. They didn't have to think about how to act. They didn't have to think about what we were going to do. There was none of that in-between anxiety, right? When does it start? When do we leave? What do we do when? I told them during the day is for the kids, and at night it's an adult party, right? The Jägermeister's coming out at night. Like the kids are not allowed, after when the sun goes down, your kids better not be here, right? I was very distinct about what was happening and when. So if you take that energy and you put it in your company and you say, we have very specific meetings. So we have in my company we curate the meetings. All meetings must start on time. They must end early, as best we can to end early. We never go overtime, ever, ever, ever. So within a minute, the meeting started at 2. By 2:01, we are starting. And if you show up late, you have to sing. Unless you're a great singer, then we make you do terrible poetry. And that only happens like once every 3 or 4 years, where someone actually goofs and has to sing, and the whole company hears about it, and that reinforces it. And it's a fun punishment. It's not like I'm going to call you to a separate meeting and write you up or something, right? But we always start on time. And then the meetings we have several curated meetings. So we have a cockroach meetings and we have ostrich team meetings. These are 15 minutes long, one topic only. Cockroaches, hey, I have a small problem. Who can help me? Ostriches, hey, I just need to learn something. Help me get my head out of the sand. Like, I don't know. This client just called me and I have to be on this meeting. I don't know anything about this client. Who can fill me in? Who can just give me the download? Like in the Matrix, where they would, stick the thing in the back of his head and suddenly he knew how to fly a helicopter, right? That's like an ostrich meeting. Just give me the information I need. Think about how different that is for the employees. They know what to expect. They know what their role is. They know what's going to happen. And it's one topic and there's no prep time. You just show up and help. The other big thing about those meetings, they're optional. Doesn't matter who calls it. It is optional. Even if the CEO, I ask you to come to an ostrich meeting, you have full carte blanche to tell me you're too busy, because it is just an optional meeting. I'm just seeing who can help me right now. Right? So they can control that.
Yeah.
The other big thing is that anyone can call those meetings. They're not hierarchical. So anyone can say, I have a problem. Who can help me? And they can invite me. They can invite the CEO. They can invite the CTO. They don't have to go through their manager in 9 levels of bureaucracy to try to get to the right person, right? And wait a week to get a response back. They can just say, I've got this problem. Who can help me for 15 minutes?
Yeah.
So if you can curate those, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, now what about more serious issues? Let's say we have a company issue, or something, all hands on deck, we've got a client problem we have to solve or something. What do you do about those kind of meetings?
So we call that a tiger team meeting. So we use these animals to sort of help people visualize the change in the meeting. So think if you have a cockroach in the bathroom, it's a small problem. You may not be the one who cleans it up, but it's a small issue. Who can help me get this little cockroach out of here? If you have a tiger in your bathroom, you're going to need animal control, a dart gun, a crane, people to help you. I mean, this is a huge moving thing. There's going to be a very large agenda. There's going to be preparation work. There's going to be all these things. So if we call a tiger team meeting and you look at the length of the meeting, it could be, so it's at least an hour up to all day, right? This could be, we've called day-long tiger team meetings if we had, geez, we're about to land this client that's going to double our business, or geez, we might lose this client that's going to be half our business, whatever this big good or bad thing is. And then you have an agenda, right? So these meetings have to have agendas. Everyone knows what they have to have prepared for in advance. And that way we're not meeting. I mean, for those of you listening, think about how many times you've had a meeting to prepare for another meeting you have to have. Mm-hmm. Right? We all come together to talk. No one told you we were going to talk about client XYZ. You get there and you're like, well, okay, well, I need to go back. I got to pull this report. I got to talk to John about that, the salesperson. You have to do all this work before I can actually help you with your problem, right? If someone would have told me we're going to meet about XYZ company, I could have pulled the report. I could have called Steve in advance. I could have gotten all this information, shown up to the meeting, and been really effective with everybody's time. So we have to have agendas. We have to have all that information in advance and give people the time and the expectation of what they're going to be doing in this meeting.
Yeah, no,
Now,
I think I mean, obviously I think it's totally anecdotal. I mean, but I think most everybody can think of a time or a boss or a manager that they've had over the years, that they would consider effective or not effective. Right. And at least in my experience, and it's funny to take it back to education, my wife is sort of the hard ass, right? She's the one that's tough and she makes the kids work. And she, I mean, there is no slacking off in her class and there's no tolerance for BS, right? Like, I mean, she's pretty hardcore as, compared to a lot of her peers, but those kids, I mean, there's always a wait list to get into her class. There's always more people than you can imagine. I mean, she's getting, wedding invitations from kids she had 13 years ago. She's getting all this stuff, right? Yeah. So, but I mean, what a beautiful thing, right? But so on the surface, you go, oh God, well, she's kind of mean. Why is she being so mean all the time? But what the kids love about it, and just like you would love of a great manager, even if they're kind of a hard ass, is what the expectation is. You know what you're supposed to do. So when you've A, fallen short, or B, met or exceeded expectation. Like, where you're at. Yep. And so I really love the way you're describing these meetings, and sort of, I even all the way down to the animal metaphor, right? I mean, it gives you sort of this, without even thinking about it, the type of thing that's coming up, right? I mean, obviously if it's this, tiger meeting, you go, oh, well, crap, it's big, it's scary, it's got giant teeth, it can kill me in my sleep. And then the other version, all the way on the other end, the cockroach meeting is like, obviously, well, I mean, maybe it's systemic, maybe there could be a bigger problem, but nonetheless, it's a little thing. And so I think that's just great.
Yeah. And so we also have daily stand-ups. I mean, those are like, 30-minute meetings, and that's might happen in a sales team has a daily stand-up or a weekly stand-up. We have those meetings. We have department meetings, team meetings. They generally meet once a week to once a month, depends on the department. So it's not always an animal, but they may have a standing meeting and they have an agenda and they have certain things. Again, they curate that as well. Sure. The other meeting that's really important, I think, that we have now, we do sprints, and we bring in Scrum and Agile for particular projects. And so we'll follow that methodologies when we do that. But the other meeting outside of that that's super important, it's called a Tsunami planning meeting. And I require every one of my teams, my finite teams, so customer service, sales, these are teams that are forever going to exist in the organization, right? These aren't temporary teams. They have to do one Tsunami planning meeting per month. So they come together once a month and they answer an imaginary question. They practice having a fake meeting. Now, that may sound a little strange to people, but if you say, what would happen if our business doubled? What would happen if 2 people on our team got really sick and we had, we're really busy? What would happen if Chris got hit by a car and was in a coma for the next 3 years? What would happen if, whatever the scenario is, right? What would we need to do? Are we ready? What could we put in place to be better prepared? They practice critically thinking. They practice arguing. They practice disagreeing in a setting that is safe because it's not a real issue, right? It's not really happening. And they get the opportunity to see my team isn't going to laugh at me. No one's going to call me stupid. My boss isn't going to fire me for disagreeing, right? And my team is really going to hear me. And the leader has an opportunity to look at the meeting and say, Sally is not speaking up. And I know Sally has great ideas. Why isn't Sally speaking up? They can go back and have a little team meet or a little, coaching session and figure out what's going on with Sally. Or Thomas is like constantly dominating the conversation. He's interrupting people. He's not letting them speak, or he's not letting a particular person speak. How do we deal with that, right? So when we do have a real meeting and there is a real issue, they are in tune, they are set, and they can actually solve real problems. Because what I notice in organizations, when I go help them out, when they bring me in to consult, you go in and you can see the dysfunction everywhere, right? There's like 3 years of passive aggressive energy between these 2 people in a meeting because they never resolved that one time that Thomas bit off Sally's head and he doesn't even remember it, but she can't let go of it. And there's all this like crap happening that can't, so you have to practice that stuff with your team. Your people need to practice giving you bad news. I mean, that sounds silly. That sounds ridiculous. But if they don't know how to deliver it to you and they don't see that you're not going to bite their head off, they're never going to bring you the hard stuff. They're always going to, pass the buck on that.
Yeah. And I think that's a really interesting insight. I mean, it's no different than, fire drills or, get under your desk, earthquake drills or, get off the beach, tsunami drills or whatever. I mean, you might think it is a little bit silly in that time, but there's something to getting those reps, even if you never need it. But the one time you do, you're not going to panic. You're not going to freak out. You're going to know how to get to wherever. Right. So when, so-and-so gets hit by a bus or when there is an employee or client issue, your team will already have sort of thought through what this feels like. How will we do that? And I think that's a pretty incredible insight. I've actually never heard of anybody doing that. That's awesome.
Think of how much time we spent in sports, and not everyone listening may be a sports person, but how many hours do kids spend in any sport you can think about practicing the sport versus actually playing?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I can speak, my boys both play football and lacrosse and, it's 5 days a week of football practice for one game a week, and one game of 1 hour and 15 minutes or whatever it is, and they're practicing 3 or 4 hours a day, 5 days a week, and so, it's a perfect metaphor for this. And it's funny that we don't, or at least for most people, I don't think it's common to this idea of doing it at work too. So I really like that. Just take
30 minutes with your team once a month and just practice a fake thing. Give them a fake scenario and see how they do and see how they act and how they collaborate or don't collaborate. And that will give you incredible insight as a leader to what you need to do. And where you need to make changes and who's not working and who is and who's your real star. If you think someone's a star and they get into this fake scenario and they're totally screwing it up, they're not your star.
Well, and like you were saying, or like we were discussing earlier about this idea of evolution and getting better and learning from other people, and that we're not just going to pull out of thin air these, solutions to complex problems. Like we need to lean into the experience of other people to learn these things. And so, this is a perfect example of sort of forcing that scenario, right? You're now in a situation where you're thinking of stuff that's kind of insane or maybe feels impractical in the moment, but the thought pathways that are opened up and the different ways that you'll start to think of different solutions. The good that comes from, thinking in this weird outside of the box way, even though it feels odd in the moment, probably serves your team much better than you'd think.
Yeah. The first time I did this with my senior team, they were kind of mad at me because I know them really well. And I told them what would happen if I was in a coma. I get hit by a bus. I'm in a coma for 3 years. What happens? Go. And they were mad at me for even suggesting that. Right. Yeah. But they started talking about it and we realized there was nobody else authorized to sign payroll.
Right.
We realized that
it's that whole, you don't want to think about those things. Those are the emotional, yucky things. But the pragmatic bit, is if all these people who happen to work in our organization want to retain their work afterwards, we have to have a plan for that just in case. You never know. It could be a strike of lightning or whatever. But, regardless of what the situation is, and so I think that's really great. But I understand the fear or the anger or the whatever emotional response too, because of course nobody wants to think of these things. It's, the same reason most Americans don't have a will written and, this kind of thing is nobody wants to think about that piece, and it doesn't even have to be as dire as death. Maybe you're just incapacitated for one reason or another, or you're laid up for 6 months or, who knows? But I think, ultimately the premise is the same, and the idea of working through that exercise makes a lot of sense. So I wanted to take sort of pivot here a little bit and talk about something that, you're very well known for, obviously, and that's sort of developing corporate cultures or moving culture into a remote team. And I wondered if we couldn't maybe start digging in on that a little bit. I've read a couple of your heard a couple of your talks and read some other things where you have sort of a 7-point model for building a corporate culture or the different components of a corporate culture. I wonder if you wouldn't spend some time talking about that.
Sure. So, for my first book, which is called The Power of Company Culture, I went back and researched, and I read hundreds of books, and I really became as big of a student as I could on this topic. And what I noticed between all of the things that people were saying and all of the research that was out there and all of my interviews, I did hundreds of interviews on my podcast with these top leaders, I was consistently hearing certain things that great cultures were good at. So there's definitely the things you need to do if you just want to be good at culture. You need to have a mission statement. You need to have your values identified. You need to focus on your why. There's all these pretty common things you can think about. But there was a difference in what the greatest companies were doing, right? These are market leaders. These are companies that are doing great things. And and sometimes ones you didn't even hear about because they were so good, they got bought up by somebody else, and then they just became a part of another company, but they did these things really well. So there's 7 pillars, and we can go through some of them here. The first one, and I think this is of the most important, is transparency. How transparent can you be? Now, remember I talked about earlier, our brains cannot fill in information that we don't have, right? We can only take the facts we have. And if one of the facts that I have in my brain is that my boss is going to lie to me and I may not have a job tomorrow because that happened to me once before, and you don't tell me everything, I'm going to go to that fact I have in my brain, right? So people fill in the gaps. Like it's like the Mad Libs. Remember that Mad Libs as kids, right? And if you only know like 10 words, you can only fill in 10. Like your Mad Lib is going to look a lot different than the boss's Mad Lib who has 1,000 words in his vocabulary to use, right? So how transparent can we be? Every month I share my P&L with my entire company. Every month we share our sales goal. Every month we tell everyone in the company everything we can at a pretty high strategic level, because we do a 30-minute meeting. We're trying to keep our meeting times down. And if anyone has questions about any of that, and I've had people schedule meetings with me and ask me, what does it mean on the P&L when it says this? And what, they were curious, and we told them. We give people that information, and they know, are we struggling? Are we doing well? Where's our sales team doing well? Are they not doing well? What partnership is working? Which one isn't working? Yeah. All of that helps them make better decisions and feel better about where they are in the company, feel better about their trajectory. But also, if they don't know what I know, they can't possibly help me solve big problems.
Yeah, I know a company out in California also. They're an online education provider for creative people. And they do, they sort of are one of the better examples I know of, in this transparency. And what he's found, the manager over there, this guy, Chris Dyer, what he has found with his people is that by being open and transparent, it serves as a motivator. Right. I mean, like you're saying, people have to know what's going on, right? If they know the business is suffering and that could affect their employment, for example, well, they might be more motivated to do whatever they can do to try and, elevate, whatever this metric is, right. Or, also, it kind of gives them a little stake in the game, right? It makes them feel more managerial or more integral to a company. They're not just a worker bee, rather they're a business associate and they're a part of this company, and I think that that's really great, because there's a lot of these kinds of words like transparency that get thrown around a lot. And I think there's a lot of room for interpretation, but I like the way that you're defining the term, because I think, it is more about really showing the behind the scenes than it is about just saying we're very transparent and we're open and honest and we're radically honest, or, any of these phrases that people throw around.
Even being transparent is, do your senior leaders all know what each other's goals are? I 9 times out of 10, when I work with a company and I ask them that question, they tell me no. They worked with the CEO on their goals, right? It was part of their comp package or whatever. And there was no sharing of those goals between them. And if you look at that, and I went, okay, great. Can we share? I think we talk. Okay, we pull them all up, and inevitably within 5 minutes, I have found that their goals are competing to each other. There is no way for everyone on that senior team to reach all of their goals and be happy. It
makes sense, right? They're actively working against one another in some respect. So
unintentionally and unknowingly working against each other, right? How crazy is that? And when they found out, it was like, all we had to do is change some things around. But you can't possibly, and it wasn't intentional by the CEO. They just negotiated these things at different times, and there were different priorities, and didn't realize that if sales meets their goal, customer service is not. Yeah. Or if customer service does, sales will never meet their goal, right? And that's crazy. So you have to bring these things up to the surface so everyone knows what the goals are, everyone knows where we're headed, and, there's a conflict here. How do we resolve that? So you don't have those two people fighting with each other in every meeting they're in, again, unintentionally, because they have totally different priorities or objectives of what they've been told they're supposed to go and do.
Yeah. You hear a lot of people talk about alignment and this idea of aligning with company missions or aligning with company goals. But I think you're making a great point that it's not just about alignment, but it's about understanding each other's goals. Life happens. We're all at different stages. Everybody's got kids or no kids, or they live in an apartment or a house, or they live wherever, and everybody's got different needs and different, takeaways that they want to get. And so I think it's really important to not just align with sort of a company vision, but, in a grander scale, make sure that you understand where everybody's at.
Yeah, absolutely. So the next pillar is positivity, which is the best organizations know how to focus on what is working. They don't spend their time problem solving, quote unquote, right? They're not out there looking for problems. They're looking for opportunities. Where can we get better? So in every meeting, when we show up, and if you want, this is a fantastic little thing you can do. If you ever have a really angry client or angry vendor or angry person, even your spouse, you can use this with, right? Because we're in trouble all the time. Especially if we have teachers for wives, is to say, well, before I understand you're upset, but let's start with what's working, right? What have I done well? What are you happy with, right? Whatever that term is. Because I've had clients call up and be like, I'm so mad about this thing. And I'd be like, really understand, let's dive into that. But can we start with what's working? I want to understand where are we okay? And they'll go through like, well, you guys do this really well, you do this really well. I really appreciate you calling me back. Okay, and suddenly their energy level goes right, and now they're okay. They just remembered. You just remembered. Everything's okay. It's just this one little thing. Okay, now tell me what's happening. They tell you. In a perfect world, if you had a magic wand, how would this be different? So instead of trying to take them from mad to not mad, trying to bring them back to status quo, I'm saying, let's talk about this. Let's think bigger than just this issue. If you're saying my report didn't get to you in 24 hours, in a perfect world, how would you get? Well, there's one thing on the report I need to know right away. I don't really care if this other stuff comes to me quickly. Oh, well, did you know I can turn on this thing that would send you that part of the result of the report in advance? You can't, because I didn't make that change. They're happy, right? I took them to a new area. I went beyond where they thought they could be by looking for an opportunity to grow. So that's the best organizations look at those situations and say, how do we use this as a catapult to something bigger, right, or better, as opposed to, well, can I just get them to shut up and just get back to
Yeah, well, I love that. It's this concept of sort of framing our conversations, right, and putting them in a different light. And, we talked, or, we haven't said the word out loud, but we've touched on several times this idea of sort of a negativity bias, this bias that we're always sort of looking for the worst in somebody instead of the best. And I think that this, the story that you just shared is a really good illustration of this concept of, just changing the way that we say it, right? Instead of saying, yeah, you're wrong, we suck, or, you're right, we suck, we could have done this better, blah, blah, blah. It really is just shifting the attitude. It's not that we're not going to address that issue, but, we need to understand what's working in order to understand why this isn't working. And I think that that's a really smart approach.
Yeah. And if anyone wants to dive into that, it's called Appreciative Inquiry. You can read more of this, lots of good books. My book's got a whole chapter on it, but there's great books and things about that. So there's a really cool thing called positive deviance, which is what's the positive thing happening in like a really large subset of numbers of bad, right? So if your sales team was like underperforming, the positive deviance would be, well, is there one or two salespeople that are doing really well, right? That are making their number. And if there is, go and study what they're doing. Completely ignore all of the salespeople who are not making their number. Go and study and figure out why they're making their number. What are they doing? And once you have figured that out, get them to teach that to everybody else, right? We often think, well, these 5 salespeople suck. We need to fire them. We need to get new ones, or we need to send them to training, or we need to put them on a plan, or we need to have coaching calls with them. Bull crap. Why are the 2 people doing well? That's all you need to figure out, and that will tell you how to solve, the larger problem with your sales team.
Well, and I think digging that deep too will give you, provide you some insights. You might see which way the wind is blowing before somebody else does, or you might, because there's, I think things like introspection and things like that, like being willing to accept that maybe I'm doing something wrong or whatever. But I love this idea of going and actually just looking at this minority of things that are actually performing well. Sure, yeah, maybe sales are down overall, but my God, in this one segment, things are going like crazy. Like what's going on in that segment? How could we chase that down? And I think that idea of sort of being agile and moving around is a really insightful one. One of these company culture objects that you talk about a lot is this idea of listening and letting people know that they, I think there's some studies out there that seem to indicate that one of the biggest problems in any organization and maybe among people in general is that, people just want to be heard and they're not necessarily being heard. And at work, we have a great opportunity to do this. And I know you happen to have some insight in this.
Yeah. So one of the next pillars would be listening, right? Is making sure people feel heard. And we have it's sort of a two-way street, right? Like how do we show people, how do we have good listening techniques? How do we have active listening, which is, putting our devices away, good eye contact, asking good questions. So there's a couple of things that we can do as leaders to make sure people feel heard. The first one is to use this concept I love called 3+. So if someone comes to you and they're emotional we're all emotional all the time, but I mean, they're particularly seem elevated, right? They're overly happy, they're overly sad, they're overly angry, right? They're sort of coming to you with some energy, for you to qualify and quantify what's really happening. And so if you came to me and you seem kind of upset, I'd be like, Ryan, what I'm hearing is that you're upset because this client won't sign the contract. And you go, well, that's not exactly it. I'm upset because that client, that contact won't give that contract to their boss so I can get it signed. So it's not the contract, it's just one person's blocking me. Oh, so what you're saying is you're upset at that one person, right? So I am saying it a second time. You're upset at that one person for not delivering it to their boss. Yes, but it's also because I know their boss is on vacation. So you're upset that they can't move. They physically cannot go because the decision maker isn't available. Yes, that's what I'm saying. Right? So I have now asked you 3 clarifying questions to get to the real frustration that you're upset about. Because one thing that we don't realize is if you and I are having a conversation and you say something to me, it is actually my job to get the meaning right. And that's counterintuitive. We think it's the person talking that's supposed to get the meaning correct. They're supposed to deliver it in a way that is so clear that everyone can understand what's being said. And that is fundamentally impossible to do. There's no way you cannot understand everyone else's brains and life and interpretations and experiences. Yeah, but it is my job as the listener to get it right by asking these questions. What I'm hearing you say is, what I think you're saying the problem is that, and then if I don't get it right, and if I have to keep asking, and even if I get it right, I still should ask 2 more clarifying questions to really make sure I got it right. Because ultimately, someone is coming to you saying they're mad at somebody, and really what they're mad at is something else, right? They're really happy I'm really happy that Tom met his sales goal this thing. So it was Tom who really did this? Well, yeah, it was Tom, but also his team, and so you're happy with your team. Yeah, my team's doing really great. We brought in this new inside salesperson. Oh, is it the team is doing really well? Is the inside? Oh no, it's so interesting when you sort of clarify and you get down to what are they really saying? Because when we have a heightened emotional level, we tend to just lose our articulation skills, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it seems like a lot of us speak in sort of generalizations or in sort of like an abstract term, right? We know we're feeling something, but we're not exactly sure how to put that into words. And what's interesting about this process and sort of uncovering or peeling back the layers is that you're basically kind of revealing something that we didn't even understand, right? So we think we're upset at, this first level person who won't pass this document on to their boss, when the thing that they're actually upset about is just, it's a matter of timing. It's really that this guy happens to be out of town, and so we're busy thinking, about the most immediate pinprick, right? We're thinking about the nail, not the guy hammering it. Right. And so, because we're responding to the most immediate need or the most immediate problem. And so I think that's really great. And we've sort of covered that idea too, when we were discussing sort of the CEOs and maybe the executive leadership or really anybody, and trying to uncover everybody's goals, right? I mean, everybody has this top level goal where it's yeah, sure, I want the company to succeed. Okay, but the reason we want the company to succeed is so I can get that houseboat, or so that we can go on vacation this year, or so that I can feel fulfilled professionally, or whatever it is, obviously you want people to care about your business and they need to be involved in the culture of the company, but they're going to have some self-serving needs, right? I want to put my kid into a private school. Therefore I hope the company does good, so I'll do my part to make sure the company does good, but that top level goal of the company doing good, if I just work for that goal, it's not serving my child getting into private school. I need to be doing what I need to do to take care of that, end goal. And so I think taking this time and being thoughtful about it and sort of uncovering or peeling back the layers is a really critical step.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. The other technique that you sort of brought up or that I've heard in your talks around this is this idea of active listening. And do you mind sort of breaking down what active listening is? And I think this is a term, and for people who listen to this show, they're going to hear me say this every episode. But, you hear so much time around or so much talk about intention and being intentional in the things that we're doing. And I think that we're seeing that as we go through these different aspects of management and remote leadership, that being intentional in what we're doing. But I think that relates to this listening topic too, this idea of being intentional and actively listening. So do you mind talking a little bit about that?
Yeah. So active listening, some of the things we talked about, but more specifically, if you are listening to someone talk, and your gut reaction is that you hear something, right? And you're basically waiting for the other person to shut up so that you can respond. If you're listening to respond versus listening to understand, that's the difference in active listening. So if you find yourself sort of like, I had this thing. And I'll give you a good example. So a few years ago, when we could actually have a Super Bowl party, I had a buddy over, several people over, and we were having a discussion. And this guy said, "Yeah, we're going to be going to Yosemite with the family, going camping." And you could tell like he was worried about it, right? And immediately, one friend started talking about the time he went to Yosemite, and then my buddy kind of got back into the conversation, and another buddy started talking about what camper equipment to use, what sleeping bags, how to keep your stuff safe from bears. And like the guy came back to the conversation again. And so the difference is I was listening to understand. I wasn't listening and I wasn't hearing a detail and then going down some path because that's what I heard or what I know. And so I kept listening. And finally I said to him, my buddy, I said, what's the fear here? What are you really worried about? Because he wasn't articulating it. He wasn't getting it out, but he kept kind of coming back to we're going on this trip. I don't know how it's going to go. And, it's the first time we've gone away. And so I finally got it out of him. What he was worried about was there's no Wi-Fi. What are the kids going to do? What is he going to do with 3 children in a freaking camper or this motorhome he's rented when there's no Wi-Fi? They usually are on their iPads all the time, or there's Netflix. Like he was like, am I going to go crazy? But what everyone else had contributed was about things they knew about because they immediately were listening to respond, heard a detail. Oh, I know that detail. I know Yosemite. I've been there. I know about campers. I know about sleeping bags. And that wasn't anything what he was talking about. And he didn't even really know what he was quite trying to articulate. It took him a moment to he knew he was kind of upset, or he was sort of had forelearning about going on this trip, right? But he didn't quite know. And I had to kind of ask him a few questions to finally figure out what it was he was worried about. And that was spending too much time with your kids, right? Was that going to be overwhelming for him? He's stuck in a camper for 7 days, on the road and in this no Wi-Fi zone.
Well, unfortunately, it's sort of a sad reality of the time we're living in. This is the guy's concern, but no, it's true.
Nonetheless, his concern, right?
Well, and the point is that you were able to sort of, by listening thoroughly and not chasing down each of those little trails, and I admit, I do that with, I try very hard not to. But, you get that little spark in your head when you hear somebody say something. You go, oh, God, I have to say this. I have to respond. I have a thing. And the reality is, no, you just need to stop and let that person articulate it. And so, it's definitely, active listening is not something that just comes for free. It is something you have to put some work into. But I think that the goods
that happens to everybody. So let that thing come up and then just let it go. Don't hold it there. That's what we do. That's the mistake we make, is we hold it in our brain, trying to keep it there for when the person stops talking. I promise you, if you let it go, you'll remember it if it was important. Because what will probably happen is you'll hear something deeper in the conversation and a new thought will come to your brain. And again, you can let that rest and settle down, right? And you sort of have these thoughts that keep stacking. And eventually, actually, what you get to is something pretty good, or you realize you need to ask another question to really understand where they're at. So just let it go. Don't fight it, but don't hold it there in your brain either. Let it, when you were talking just now, I felt something come up and I went, okay, let it go. Yep. Right.
Well, and that's the thing, right? I think if you really think about just sort of your experience, as you're going through life and you're hearing people say things and then you feel this thing bubble up, because that's a common experience that we would all share. When that comes up, you might notice, if you're paying more attention, if you're trying to be an active listener, you'll notice that you can't hear anything else. All you can hear is the thought in your head. And so you stop listening to them altogether and you're stuck back here. So, eventually 2 minutes down the road when they stop talking and you're now sharing your idea, maybe it's not relevant at all. Like maybe we're talking about something that we've moved way past, but you stopped in time back there a few minutes ago when I said X, Y, Z, and now we're stuck there. So I think that those are all great points and obviously something for us to work on. Here in the last couple minutes, there's one more of these topics I wanted to just talk about, and I think it just sort of helps close the loop. So if you don't mind taking a minute on it, it's this idea of measurement and understanding our metrics for success. So, it's one thing to understand goals. It's one thing to all be working towards an objective, all that stuff. But how do we know when we've got there?
Well, I don't know if we ever really get there with anything, right? Most success and businesses, it's infinite. It's always going. So, you can have a goal. We want to sell the business or we want to reach this whatever, or, you can have a finite goal, but I think in most situations, there really isn't a true end. So instead, what we need to do is think about, well, how do we measure what matters, what's important? How do we figure out what's really important? So I'll give you an example for sales. I know so many people that say for their salespeople, it's all about how many calls they make, how many proposals they send out. I have never used that as measurement. That is not good measurement to me. To me, it's, did you meet your quota, right? We came up with this number. We said you were going to do X this month, right? Here's your pipeline. Okay, did you make it? Great. And if you beat it, why did you beat it? Why was it so good? Let's talk about that. That's awesome. Maybe we can do more of that, right? That's that positive deviance thing. Like where was the surprise? But also, if you didn't make it, then I might ask you, well, how many calls are you doing? How many emails are you sending out? How many proposals are you working on? Where are you talking to our partners? Then I can start to ask you those other questions. But if I just set this blanket goal of you must make 20 phone calls a day, and that's measurement, that's terrible measurement because they can make 20 crappy calls. Mm-hmm. I'd rather have them make 2 awesome calls that they highly researched, they knew everything about the person, and they got in and they could really make a good connection and actually have a chance to bring that person on as a client.
Yeah, well, and I think that's the thing, right? And this hedges some of those fears we were talking about early on with managers and, a poor manager of a remote team who's really looking to sort of, see you do everything or see you in the office moving papers or, those fears are the same here, right? We're trying to figure out how to make sure you're doing your job, right? It's based in this fear. And so, but I think you're right that by choosing an actual meaningful objective instead of some kind of, I guess, kind of arbitrary or superficial metric, number of calls versus amount converted or something, and then using some of these other techniques we've discussed, going back and looking at the, success rate of those calls and what's working and what isn't. How come you were able to speak to people in this industry, but not people in this industry or, whatever, but going and sort of surfacing those, successes versus those losses. And, and I think that doing all that stuff can really help you meet a meaningful number that actually moves the bar.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, cool. So as we're winding down here, the last couple of minutes, do you want to just talk a minute? I don't know if you want to get into your new book, but if you'd like to talk a little bit about your new book, I happen to know that you're working on something, and I wondered if maybe you'd like to talk about it a little bit.
So the new book is called Remote Work. You can find it on Amazon. You can look up Remote Work, Chris Dyer, or wherever you buy your books. And it comes out at the end of May, so you can pre-order it. And just excited. It is a story about why I went remote, why my co-author went remote in 2001. She had 300 recruiters around the world. And so there are our stories, and there is a lot of this culture things we've been talking about today, but we also started writing it before COVID. And when COVID happened, we realized we needed to get more stories. So we have case studies on Cornerstone On Demand, who onboarded 4,000 people remotely during the pandemic. We have AMN Healthcare, who recruited and onboarded remotely 5,000 nurses for the state of New York during the height of the pandemic. What the United States Marine Corps has been doing with remote work in talking to their general out of Camp Pendleton, which is near me here in San Diego, south of me in San Diego. All these case studies of how did other organizations handle remote? What are they doing? What are they thinking about? Right. So hopefully we've created a really good cross-section for people to understand how to do remote, why it's important, why it works, but that it works differently for different organizations and why it works differently for them, right? So the startup is different than the big giant conglomerate or a military organization, or all these sort of different perspectives. So if you're going to have remote work in your company, hybrid, regular, full, part-time, our entire guide is there. It's our Bible, our guidebook, whatever you want to call it, right? It's the Hitchhiker's Guide to Remote Work. Of whatever you need to know, we've got it in there.
Yeah, no, I think that's just great. And I think that, it's really important. We're focused here on remote work and remote work and the role it'll play in sort of the future. And I know that there's a lot of big mindset shifts and things like that are going to happen to move some of these dinosaurs forward into what's next and some of this other stuff. But one of the things I like to point out is that the fundamentals of being a great remote leader will honestly serve you no matter what you do. And so, these ideas of developing corporate culture, these may be finely tuned or could be sort of, worked well in a remote team. But if you were doing these sorts of things, they would help you in your normal business too, or in your sort of co-located operation. Being empathetic, being a great listener, understanding the needs of your people, understanding the goals of your management team, all this stuff. If you have all those things in place, you're going to have a fine organization, regardless of whether it's fully remote, hybrid situation or a traditional co-located environment. So I think it's all very important information.
Awesome. Well,
Cool.
I really appreciate your support on that. And it was a fun conversation. I like being here today.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you mind just as we close out telling people where they can find out more about you? We'll put it in the show notes and everything, but if you don't mind just telling people where they can find out more about you, book you to hire, or find
out more about me, the book. I have a remote leadership course that we have on the website. It's chrisdyer.com. If you're interested in my core business, which is background checks and employment screening and drug testing, peopleg2.com. Happy to have you connect with me on LinkedIn or wherever you do your social. I'm probably there everywhere, but maybe Pinterest I'm on. So feel free to reach out.
Great. Well, cool. Well, thank you so much, Chris. I really appreciate your time and sitting down with us this afternoon and talk about this. I think it's all really important stuff, and best of luck with the new book. I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks, Ryan.
So cool. Take care.
I don't owe you anything. I don't know you.